Hey guys, I hope you're all doing really well. I'm Allure Cosplay, and today we break down my Mirrym deck. Let's go. Starting with my commander, this is Mirrym, Sentinel Worm. He costs 6 to cast, he has Flying and Ward 2. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. There are only 2 sorceries in this deck, Part the Water Well and Walk the Eons. Both cost 6 to cast. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Now let's go over the instance. Psychotic Rift, if you overload it for 7, it will clear all your opponent's boards but not yours. Druid's Deliverance and Root Snare both cost 2 to cast, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. Winged Portent costs 3 to cast, draw a card for each creature with flying you control. I also have a couple of counter spells, as well as a couple of instant spells which help me flicker my dragons. There are 35 lands in this deck, 12 of them are special lands or dual lands. And now let's talk about the artifacts. Quicksilver Amulet, it costs 4 to cast. If you pay 4 and you tap it, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Monster Manual costs 4 to cast. If you tap 2, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Lithoform Engine costs 4 to cast. Pay 2 and tap it. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Pay 3 and tap it. Copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Pay 4 and tap it. Copy target permanent spell you control. Panharmonicon costs 4 to cast. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Swift Boots cost 2 to cast. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. There are 6 mana rocks in this deck. One of them also does card draw. Dragon's Hoard. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on Dragon's Hoard. If you tap it, remove a gold counter from it and you can draw a card, or you can tap it for mana of any color. And now let's talk about the enchantments. Lurking Predators cost 6 to cast. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise you may put that card on the bottom of your library. Elemental Bond costs 3 to cast. Whenever a creature with a power of 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Warstorm Surge, it costs 6 to cast. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Parallel Lives, it costs 4 to cast. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens on the battlefield instead. Doubling Season costs 5 to cast. If an effect will create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. Dragon Tempest, it costs 2 to cast. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until the end of turn. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of dragons you control. Rhystic Study costs 3 to cast. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Overwhelming Instinct costs 3 to cast. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, draw a card. Bower Passage costs 2 to cast. Creatures with flying can block creatures you control. Fires of Vyavimaya cost 3 to cast. Creatures you control have haste. Crucible of Fire costs 4 to cast. Dragon creatures you control get +3/+3. Gruul War Chant costs 4 to cast. Each attacking creature you control gets +1/+0 and can be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Gratuitous Violence costs 5 to cast. If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double the damage to that permanent or player instead. Garruk's Uprising costs 3 to cast. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with a power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. Whenever a creature with a power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. And last but not least, Lure costs 3 to cast. All creatures able to block enchant the creature do so. I love enchanting one of my dragons with it and basically sacrificing him because I will throw all of my dragons at one player and they have to declare all their blockers towards the one dragon that has been enchanted with this enchantment, and everything else has to go through. And now let's talk about the dragons. Goldspawn Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying and haste. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. Demanding Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target opponent unless that player sacrifices a creature. Terror of the Peaks costs 5 to cast. Spells your opponent's cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. Lathlis Dragon Queen. She costs 6 to cast. She has flying. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/5 dragon creature token with flying. If you tap 2 dragons you control, get +1/+0 until the end of turn. Atsushi the Blazing Sky costs 4 to cast. He has flying and trample. When he dies, you choose 1, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, or create 3 treasure tokens. Savage Ventmaw costs 6 to cast. He has flying. Whenever Savage Ventmaw attacks, you add 6 mana. Until the end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Drum Hunter costs 4 to cast. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with 5 or greater, you may draw a card. You can tap him for 1 mana. Dragon Master Outcast costs 1 to cast. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 dragon creature token with flying. Tyrant's Familiar costs 7 to cast. He has flying and haste. As long as you control your commander, this guy gets +2/+2 and has whenever this guy attacks, it deals 7 damage to target creature defending player control. Dracoset Maw of Flames costs 7 to cast. He has flying. Whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target, 3 damage to each up to 2 other targets. Keiga the Tidestar costs 6 to cast. Whenever it dies, gain control of target creature. Earthquake Dragon costs 15 to cast. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of dragons you control. Flying and trample. If you tap 3, sacrifice a land, return this guy from the graveyard to your hand. He is a 10/10. Wrathful Red Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying. Whenever a dragon you control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dragon. Niv Mizzet costs 6 to cast. He has flying. Whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet deals 1 damage to target creature or player. You can tap him and draw a card. Intet the Dreamer costs 6 to cast. He has flying. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 3. If you do, exile the top card of your library face down. You may look at that card for as long as it remains exiled. You may play that card without paying its mana cost for as long as this guy remains on the battlefield. Spellbound Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying. Whenever it attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. This guy gets +X/+0 until the end of turn, where X is the discarded card converted mana cost. Rapacious Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 treasure tokens. Hoarding Dragon costs 5 to cast. He has flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, exile it, then shuffle your library. When this guy dies, you may put the exiled card into its owner's hand. Thundermaw Hellkite costs 5 to cast. He has flying and haste. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature with flying your opponent's control. Tap those creatures. One of my absolute favorites, Astro Dragon, costs 8 to cast. He has flying. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 tokens that are copies of target creature permanent, except they are 3/3 dragon creatures in addition to their other types. They have flying. Cunning Instigator costs 5 to cast. He has flying and haste. Whenever 1 or more dragons you control attack an opponent, go target creature that player controls. Scourge of Valkas costs 5 to cast. He has flying. Whenever this guy or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target when X is the number of dragons you control. Rusei the Falling Star costs 6 to cast. He has flying. When it dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. Hellkite Tyrant costs 6 to cast. He has flying and trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Niv Mizzet number 2, he also costs 6 to cast. This spell can be countered. He has flying. Whenever you draw a card, this guy deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card. Kenra Charioteer costs 3 to cast. He has trample. Other creatures you control have trample. Niv Mizzet number 3, he also costs 6 to cast. He has flying. When it deals damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you pay 2, it deals 1 damage to any target creature or player. Terror of Mount Velus costs 7 to cast. He has flying and double strike. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain double strike until the end of it. Ganax Astro Hunter costs 5 to cast. He has flying. When he or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a treasure token. Dragon Speaker Shaman costs 3 to cast. Dragon spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Thunder Dragon costs 7 to cast. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to each creature without flying. And now I'll show you a really cool combo that I managed to pull off with this deck. Starting from the previous turn, I had already cast Panharmonicon as well as my commander. I then cast this enchantment, dragon creatures you control get +3/+3, as well as Astral Dragon. Now when Astral Dragon comes into play, this will trigger my commander and I will make a second Astral Dragon. However, Panharmonicon will trigger, so that will make a third Astral Dragon. When Astral Dragon comes into play, it creates 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent, except they're 3/3 dragon creatures in addition to their other types. They have flying. I chose to copy this. So this one dragon will create 2 tokens when it enters. The other 2 dragons will also create 2 tokens each. All of them will be 3/3 dragons that have flying. However, all of them will also give each other +3/+3. If you have Doubling Season or Parallel Lives on top, you can double all the tokens as well. Well, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more random nerdy content from me. Don't forget to click the notification button so you know when I upload next. Bye!